position. It's going to be positioned in a way that you can't read the board, and then the students are going to complain. I don't care. All right. So here's our objective for Unit 2, Day 3, to understand Jesus as a prophet in the triumphal entry and the withering of the fig tree. We're also going to talk about and cleansing of temple. All right, the cleansing of the temple is one of the wild stories that we'll read about Jesus. Today we're starting what we call Passion Week. All right, this is the beginning. This marks the beginning of Passion Week. So if you are not familiar with that, we're going to go over this. We're reading in Mark 11 today. That's what the outline, when we get into our work in the outline in a little bit. We're reading Luke 19 and 20. We're reading Matthew 21 and 22. All right. So one of the things you're going to notice in these readings is that we're in Mark 11, and we're going to mostly be in Luke 19 and Matthew, actually I think it's 20 and 21. I think it's what we're at. And Matthew 20. So the thing about this reading is that I'll first talk quickly about Luke. In Luke, remember that long section of parables I just had you guys read to catch up? Luke says Jesus was going to Jerusalem and he's taught these things. So Luke has this long list of parables. And I don't have time to spend on it today, or I would. But in those parables, he has a parable that it's my favorite parable. If you notice, if you just spend super careful time to read the things about it, it will point out some stuff that people usually misunderstand. If I had time, I would lecture for a full 45 minutes on just that parable and how amazing it is. It is the prodigal son. All right? No. I'll try. Let's see if this works. Is it better? All right. So we have the prodigal son hidden in there. Prodigal son in chapter 15. All right. That's a parable about letting in not just letting in, but welcoming the outsider. All right. Maybe one of these days I'll just spend time on it anyways, and I'll just dedicate a class period to it, because it is an incredible parable that I think if we understood it better, it would revolutionize the church. That's my whole whatever. I'll talk about that at a different time. But today, here's the big focus. We're going to start at the triumphal entry. All right. Triumphal entry. This is where Jesus actually goes into Jerusalem and then heads to the temple. So this is where Jesus enters from the east, enters gates, and goes to temple. All right. Does anybody know what time in the church year, what we call the day that we celebrate this? You guys have almost certainly all been at church for this or heard about this. Does anybody know when we celebrate this? It's coming up soon. What? It's not Easter, but it's related to Easter because it is the week before. It's Palm Sunday. Has anybody ever heard that? You guys have all probably heard Palm Sunday, right? Yeah, where they have the big leaves. They have the big leaves and they give them to all the kids, and the kids run around and yell, Hosanna, Hosanna. At least that's what my churches have done, right? Because they're trying to demonstrate this. It's where Jesus comes in on a donkey. He gets a donkey, he comes in, and we get there's some interesting stuff in these accounts. If you want to pay attention to it closely and read the different stories, they do have some unique things about getting the donkey and stuff like that. But all of the synoptic, or all Gospels, all four Gospels begin Passion Week this way. Begin Passion Week with entry. All right. When we read next unit, when we get there about like the end of March or the beginning of April, we're going to read John, and John's chronology is weird and does not even come close to aligning with the other three. But he still puts the triumphal entry at the same point in the story. The beginning of the last week of Jesus' life, Jesus comes in and enters through these gates. So it's a pretty big deal of a story. But I'm just going to assume you guys are all going to get dragged to Easter at some point, right? You guys are probably going to go to Easter Sunday service, or you'll go to Palm Sunday, or you'll go to both. It's almost certainly true. So what I want to do is I'm not going to spend time on the look at what it tells us about Jesus and all this stuff. I want to instead talk about how the triumphal entry is performance art and protest with all prophets in view. All right. You guys may not know what I mean when I say all prophets in view. He's doing like a direct reference. He is doing an art thing, firstly. If you guys don't remember when I talked about performance art, that's where you make political statements or something like that. You're performing artwork. All right, so the person becomes the artwork. He also is protesting state corruption. All right, so he's doing this in a few different ways. He's making political statements against both Rome and the Jewish temple industrial complex. That's what I like to call it, is the Jewish industrial complex. I'm not in a conspiracy theorist way where I say the Jews are lizards, but in a clever way. If you guys are kids, you don't know what I'm talking about. I did do something really funny by calling it that, by the way. So anyways, in this, one of the things that we have is that at the same time, we have a royal procession and display of soldiers at Western Gate. All right. Every year during Passover, the Romans wanted to remind the Jews who was in charge. So they came in as a processional, as a royal army, would march in soldiers from out of town and say, here we are. This is us. We own you, right? We're still in charge every single year. That's what they did. Pilate would bring in his soldiers, and they would remind the people, we are here. You had to be there. It was an obligation to be there. And people were shouting, Hail Caesar. The Hellenists were shouting, Hail Caesar, right? Hail Pilate. So that's what's happening on the western side of the city. They would come in and they'd go straight to Pilate's housing, where Pilate lives, to celebrate him and to show who it is that they are worshiping and celebrating. So this is something that is happening. And then Jesus shows up. Jesus then shows up and brings in the outsider and the oppressed. Brings outsider and oppressed. One of the notable things that our author, Gerd Tyson, that I've built a lot of this class on, that he taught me when I was researching from him, is that in a lot of this writing, and I've read this with other things, that cities, a symbol of oppression. If you think of writing, when you read an ancient text and they talk about a city, they are oppressors. They are seen as the oppressors of the villagers, oppressors of the poor. Right? They have this society that they have I like to call the temple industrial complex, that probably had 10,000 employees, according to some estimates, that was probably sacrificing close to 5,000 animals a day they're killing, by some estimates. During Passover, they're probably killing close to 5,000 animals. That's birds, sheep, things like that. They have a constant burning of things. And in order to be righteous, what do you have to do? You have to bring an animal there and sacrifice it, and you have to change your money out and do all of these processes. But guess what you really can't do if you are poor? You can't afford to sacrifice an animal, right? You have that, it becomes that the temple is taking advantage takes advantage of poor, putting money in the way of God. They literally put money in the way of God for the poor people. Right? So this is what's happening. You can't be right with God if you don't have the right amount of money. Now, for the city that is propped up on this as an industry, this is its biggest employer, is the temple. Right? This is good for the the city dwellers. This is really bad for everybody that lives out in the villages and the towns, that once a year is required by their religion to show up and sacrifice, but can't barely afford to do so. That to do so might take meals from their kids for weeks or for days. Right? This is a big deal. So when Jesus shows up, he's not just saying, I'm entering. He's showing up and saying, I am the king, not the Romans. And he's showing up with a whole bunch of homeless people and vagabonds to say, we are the true people that should be here in the temple. Right? We are the true possessors of the religion. The triumphal entry is a protest against corruption. It's humorous. All right, think about it in this way. Let's say you have an inauguration. Say that a president may be a very corrupt and wicked president that lies all the time, cheats, likes to steal money, is not legally allowed to have any sort of charity because they have stolen from orphans with kids with cancer or U.S. veterans, whatever. Just that's a hypothetical. I'm not naming anybody. But if somebody like that was a president, and they are celebrating the harm of individual people, and they're celebrating the harm of homeless people, if that person were to exist, they'd probably be pretty bad and wouldn't be a very good president. But if they did exist, let's say that at their inauguration or at some speech they're giving, let's imagine that somebody gathers to protest them, a whole bunch of homeless people. They go, whatever city this person's speaking in, they grab all the homeless people of that place, and they put on a show where they pretend to imitate exactly what that president's doing in every way. They get the dirtiest homeless people they can find, and they start big shouting, like, let's go, whatever, right? They start shouting all this stuff. It's funny, and it should be. It should show that what's happening over on the western side of the city is foolishness and mockery. That's what happened in the temple when he goes and starts looking around and goes, scoffing. He's mocking it, right? It's showing the corruption for the foolishness that it is. Yes, Deb. Here. Symbol. All right, so here's the final thing. I want us to notice a couple things here is the withering of fig tree. Withering of tree. Around clearing temple in Mark and Matthew. All right, there's this story. There's this event, this other action that he does where he calls the temple withering and false. Or not, but he says it about a fig tree. He kills a fig tree because it doesn't give him fig. It doesn't give him food, so he calls it withering. It moves around in Mark and Matthew. This is a good, I think there's important reason for why. I'm not going to get into that, but that's something to notice when you work on this outline today. The other thing is becomes parable in chapter 13 for Luke. All right, Luke does not have that story. What he does have is a parable that's almost identical to it, that he moves all the way to chapter 13, and then he gives all these parables about what the kingdom of God is actually like. So if you notice what he does, if you look at the temple needing to be cleared, all of this stuff, and you notice that, all right, before then he's described he's described the parable and he's described what the temple of God or kingdom of God should be with all these parables. He ends up showing this is what it's not, right? It's actually a really cool movement that he does. So that's kind of the other thing to notice. All right, I'm not going to lecture longer. We're going to read Mark chapter 11 and then